China is seeking to reduce the use of non-biodegradable plastic products by updating a plastic industry regulation 12 years after restrictions were first imposed on plastic bags. Social awareness on the issue of plastic pollution has significantly increased in recent years, and China has laid out 3 major goals for battling plastic pollution in the near future. So what will be done to make China's vision of environmental protection a reality? How will a ban on single-use plastic bags reshape behavior? And how can experience sharing among countries advance the global campaign against plastic pollution? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Wu Changhua, Executive Director, Professional Association for China's Environment, and Wang Huiyao, President of Center for China and Globalization. It's relatively easier to issue regulations about environmental protection, but I'm afraid it's very, very difficult to reshape the behavior of a human life. With the approval of this latest set of regulations on plastic products, what do you think will be the impact on our human behavior?
The impact will be definitely significant. As you mentioned, regulations, if you write up a regulation on paper, that seems to be relatively easy because that requires the expertise, specialized skills. But in order to change every individual's behavior, that's proven to be the most difficult task there.
Bad habits die hard.
Yeah, it's really, really difficult, actually. That takes much, much longer time, probably decades, actually, in order to get everything together, particularly around plastic waste issue there. So the new regulation in China, which was released a couple of days ago, it's regarded as another step forward, right? China started to ban the single-use plastic bags, shopping bags, about 12 years ago. And in 2017, China started to say no to importing foreign garbage, particular plastic waste there. And now, in the meantime, actually strengthening domestic regulations there. So China is clearly stepping into a direction, a future, something I call the closed loop and zero plastic waste, plastic pollution. That's the sort of future China stepping up into that sort of scenario. So the new regulation set 3 very interesting timelines. By end of this year, 2020, 2022, and 2025, I think the intention is to use the 3 years focusing on reduction, reducing the use of single-use plastic bags packaging, and also really deploy the technologies, particularly around the biodegradable plastic packaging materials there. Very important to build up the ecosystem, enabling context there, emphasizing the system change, emphasizing coordinated actions, really pulling the government, the business, and the society together and to achieve the set target.
Let me tell you one simple story. A few years ago, I was touring a park in one of the cities in Jiangsu province, and I was shocked to see kids of a local primary school left behind them a lot of garbage in the park. Primary education for kids to raise their awareness about the environment was extremely poor and continues to be poor, perhaps to a large degree. Therefore, which is more important, education in the early days of primary education, or just approval of whatever regulations through compulsory authority? I mean, which one should come first?
Well, I think it's a combination, actually. There's always, it depends how determined the government is really implement policy, because you can see sometimes the policy issued, but then implementation is really falling behind. So what I think is like garbage classification, for example, was always government has the guidelines, but people just symbolically have the classification can there, but then they really get the real things done. So I think penalties, all those measures should come up and coupled with education. So I think that, for example, I just come back from WTO about 2 months or 2 ago, and then they had a first time the meeting of WTO members. There's about 10 ambassadors, Chinese ambassador, EU ambassador, all presented. I give a keynote there on plastic ban emission into the ocean, because there's a government consensus now, like on G20 Osaka, 50 countries issue a statement that they're going to, by 2050, G20 countries will emit 0 plastic into the ocean. There's an objective on that. So with that objective, you really have to come up with implementation regulations, laws, penalties, and government helps to do that. So I think, you know, if government really determined to do that, they can. For example, import of garbages, you know, I mean, we see the pollution of air pollution is getting controlled. You know, if government is determined, we can control.
Can I just add one?
Excuse me, just one follow-up question for Harry. If I were in your shoes, I would have answered my question this way. I'm first of all a parent. I would let my kids realize how bad the behavior of a kid could be if they fail to protect the environment, because that will be very harmful to their health. And the healthy conditions of your kids would be the most important thing for a parent. So in the first place, our first role play should be the parent, and then opinion leader of a think tank on an international occasion. So I'd like to still ask a question about early education, about raising the awareness of protecting the environment.
Probably the most crucial piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
I think a few months ago, also on your program, I was on the program with a professor online from Japan, a university. And I think at one point, actually, he pointed out very interestingly, he said, you know, the model between China and Japan, just the opposite. China's always top-down, and Japan, particularly around the plastic garbage sorting, totally bottom-up. So it took Japan 30 years.
30 years.
To get to where they are today.
Not just 3 weeks
Not 3 weeks.
Enforce the regulations.
Very importantly, started with the kids, right? So a child going to kindergarten, going to school, the first thing a child learns is to how to sort the garbage, because they need to put the waste in different bins so that the waste will be collected, you know, forming the different waste streams there. Instead of parents educating kids, it's the kids going back home, educating their parents, literally teach their parents how to put things in different
garbage. That's the toughest story.
But in order to get this really formalized, you know, enforced, and then the regulation policies are coming in place, right? And basically saying, you know, for instance, in Japan, you cannot really dump your garbage anytime you want. So there are specific timelines, specific garbages, waste that you can put outdoors there, and there will be trucks actually, you know, to come to your doors and to collect them. So learning from Japan is sort of an ecosystem shaped up, really fundamentally starting with the kids, you know, with early childhood education. So in that context, government and local community have very, very important role to play in order to reinforce, make sure school education from very early age on actually really to teach the kid what is the right behavior to adopt. That's where the hope is.
I think that China is, you know, probably need both, because on the one hand, you know, China don't have many NGOs, you know, the university, you know, school system follow, you know, government guidelines, and there's no different teaching style probably in general. So for school to initiate that, you really need the government to push them. And also, on the other hand, China has so-called advantage of, you know, having the big advantage of, mobilize resources and do great things. So that kind of characteristic for China should come into play as well, because China doesn't have thousands of NGOs like Western countries, Japan or Canada has, that really grassroots movement can easily take in place. China sometimes needed both top-down and up, you know, and bottom-up both approaches. So I think that the most important thing is how serious this government wants to do that.
To be fair to the new regulation, it is in there. The language is clearly stated actually in the newly released policy document there, for emphasizing coordinated actions. So it's not just the government or business. The society has to also to join the forces in order to really address the issues there. In that context, also emphasizing awareness, public awareness, education, behavior changes there. So the language actually in the document, I think, is well developed. It's sort of the message is there. Now, next step is really the implementation, enforcement there now. So Shanghai is a very interesting case. Shanghai, actually, to be fair, it's not a campaign. Shanghai actually is local regulation. That's the brightest spot there, rather than campaigning, which we traditionally...
But the government give a lot of efforts to
you know, the regulation is the government, right? It's the regulators.
You know, the government tends to organize different campaigns without institutionalizing the regulations, without having early and primary education. Therefore, I'm talking about the human behavior, which is so difficult to change. You see some kind of a progress, but then without supervision, without punishment, first and foremost, without early education about the case behavior, these regulations and enforcement, as a result, are likely to backfire.
Totally agree.
So what will happen next? if that'll be the undoing, backfire, counterproductive, because people can easily go back to their bad habits.
So I think, again, back to the Shanghai case, which is a great life case, actually, that's been made, actually, in China in terms of how individual households and individuals actually are forced to basically sort the garbage, put the garbage waste in different bins so that we'll be able to recycle the waste there. And one, first, is institutionalized because it's a local regulation. Second, there are specific liabilities, actually, in the regulation for individuals, for households, even for companies, actually, in charge of transporting, handling, disposal of the waste there. So you started to see the real-life case in Shanghai that's being made in front of everyone's eyes. Actually, we're learning through that process. There were many, many anecdotes or stories, actually, through the social media since last July the 1st, when the regulation became effective, how difficult that is, right? Because in China, probably different from Japan, the household would somehow have different ways or behaviors, whatever. For instance, when we usually would dump the garbage, and where do we dump them? Of course, how do we sort them out according to the 4 categories that are mandated actually in the local regulation? It's difficult, but somehow I think with Shanghai, a real-life case being made, in front of us, I think we're going to learn tremendously through that process. Beijing is moving into that direction. So May the 1st of this year, Beijing is going to follow the suit. So that's going to be very interesting, another case to be made.
Let's look at this plastic ban. Henry, are you optimistic?
Well, I kind of, largely optimistic, actually, because, for example, 5 years ago, I was really pessimistic about smoke in Beijing. And now I'm quite...
Drink and drive is also a very big success in the traffic regulation.
So as I said, you got to combine community efforts with government regulations, and then also the government reinforcement is also important. And then also, you talk about regulations. For example, the apartment sometimes we live in, there's just a hole, they just throw the garbage into that. There's no consequence. Structurally, there's a default on that. But I think on the plastic, in addition to the government regulations and things like that, I think also there's international efforts. For example, I'm very pleased to see in the G20 Osaka, G20 states issued the first time, there's no argument on this statement that they're going to ban the plastic emission into the ocean by 2050. There's an objective set. And the WTO now, which has almost paralyzed, has no nothing can be agreed upon. Now they all agreed, anti-plastic pollution, particularly emission to the ocean, is one of the objectives. So the industry policies, international regulations, international member countries consultation, and also import and export production standards. There's a host of issues now needs to be all considered now. It's not just a single country, because it's, like ocean pollution plastic. Even China doesn't want to emit. There's other country emit. Oh, the other country doesn't want to. China does. It's still the same. So it has to be a collective effort. But I think in China, many things can be done. Like in a hotel, we have a lot of waste of toothbrush and all kind of plastic pollutions. Let's in Western countries, European or North America, don't have that. So things like that, simple. We can really. I mean, the new regulation says it takes 5 years to get that phased out. Why 5 years? I mean, you just stop providing toothbrush to the hotel, and then you remind people to buy from the machine. I mean, you can do it in 1 year. Why need to take 5 years? For example, those are some issues we can...
Henry, you have sent us a very quiet message, but we are surprised that the WTO is still alive based on the green awareness. You are watching Dialogue with Wu Changhua, Executive Director, Professional Association for China's Environment, and Henry Wang Huiyao, President of Center for China Globalization. We are talking about whether the latest plastic ban can be effectively implemented due to education, legislation, or supervision by the media. Perhaps it's all of the three. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. The idea of e-commerce is a loaded concept for observers of Chinese and international alike. For example, let's focus on the plastic packaging for the express delivery for JD and Alibaba. If you were a senior advisor to both the chairman of Alibaba and Liu Qiangdong, chairman of JD, what would you say to them about how to improve the image of a corporate social responsibility in terms of the environmental protection? Because each day, thousands of tons of plastic materials have been used for the packaging, for the delivery, causing a lot of damage to the environment. And I wonder if these two giants are clearly aware of the consequences.
Before I get to that point, let me just provide one important background information there. Due to the rise of e-commerce, so plastic packaging has become a huge, huge challenge. In Chinese cities, some cities, the newly added solid waste, in some Chinese cities, 85% of newly added were from e-commerce or express mail delivery packaging, plastic packaging there. So the sector overall, the emerging sector, has already posed a tremendous challenge to waste management, to urban infrastructure. In that context, to be fair to both Alibaba and JD.com, they were definitely major part of the problem. I'm delighted to see actually they started to look into to become part of the solution. If you look at both companies, they both have adopted sort of green logistics, green packaging, and they've been advocating very aggressively, actively with the government agencies to develop the sort of substitutes, right? And Alibaba even stepped forward jointly with the Ministry of Environment and Ecology and advancing biodegradable packaging materials there. So in terms of packaging, how to reduce, reuse, recycle, they are all in that context. The challenge at this moment, I think, as I said, cost remains to be a challenge, meaning if the packaging, new packaging materials actually still cost much higher than the conventional ones, and that's going to slow the process. So very, very importantly, this is where the government's policy coming in place, basically to accelerate that action, and also really encouraging giants like Alibaba, JD.com, and many others to join hands so that we'll be able to create the scale at the level, at the pace that we will dramatically reduce the cost, and so that we're going to deploy them at the right level, we would like to see. So Harry mentioned about this new regulations of 5 years. It could be long, it seems to be long, seems to be short as well, because in order for all the pieces of the puzzle coming together, that does require time, right? You need the actions, technology solutions, enabling context, infrastructure even together. So I think a 5 year is a reasonable sort of time frame that the government is looking into. Of course, very importantly, we need to really enforce them and drive them through.
Yeah, I was referring to this toothbrush forbidden use takes 5 years to phase out. Maybe that can be accelerated. But I do think that the young question was well asked, because this is probably one of the going to be prominent, most urgent issues that to be tackled in China. And also, Alibaba and JD probably have some share of that, but not really all of them. Because, for example, in Alibaba, those T-malls, it was many different shops that they want to do their packaging themselves, not Alibaba themselves. So, but then, this is really need a lot of education. Because China now, you sometimes you buy a very small thing, you come with a huge packaging, many layers of that. And so the people, this superficial, face saving, and then really have a big packaging, big decorating efforts. So that kind of luxury, over spending should be really avoided. So that's where education, I think, comes in. It's really important that we really need to educate people. Simple is beautiful, simple is a way of life, and practice simplicity. So I think that this is probably where I agree most, is the education that really we let people know why we attach all those fancy over packaging. It's not really going to help. Also using the economic materials and environmentally friendly material, that should be also into the regulation. So gradually we can probably start the campaign, because I found the packaging in China is really over packaging compared with other countries.
So cost reduction and the success of the environmental protection largely depends on whether we are able to cultivate a healthy lifestyle for the growing army of the middle class in urban cities. Would you go back to the issue of a cost reduction? How shall we get the job done?
As Harry was mentioning, actually, so the over-packaging, whatever, the wrong way of packaging, that's where the opportunities exist as well, right? That requires redesign, so designers need to come on board. That requires to refurbishing whatever the existing industrial structure, and that requires new technology innovation about materials, And with the regulation, new policy coming together, with the incentives coming together, and we're going to attract more investment into the business there as well. So that's how, you know, all the pieces are actually coming together to create this positive sort of moving forward, a cycle moving forward there. So at this moment, you know, as we were discussing here, I think regulation is absolutely important because that lays fundamentally the foundation, the policy foundation, to set the clarity on and the direction, and really provide the liability and you know, incentives there. Very importantly, the whole society needs to come together, right? And so from the urban concept, setting there, everyone recognizes the opportunity in the urban setting because that's a system, right? And majority of people living in cities there. By coming together, by really transform the city infrastructure system, including the reverse logistics, because we're going to continue to consume and to generate waste. We need to sort them. We need to put them in different waste streams. We need to collect them and handling them and dispose them and treat them, so that the infrastructure in the cities needs also to become together. So it's infrastructure, technology, products, and of course, very importantly, individuals' desire. We have to the willingness to pay. Particularly now, probably there's a certain level of primaries or prices, you know, we have to pay a little bit higher. But as I said, this is about economics, right? At the end of the day, if the scale gets together, then we're going to achieve, and then, you know, the economy of the scale. And the cost will dramatically to come down, so that everything will come together to move towards a direction to achieve the goals. Any piece of the puzzle in that context missing, that's going to dramatically impact how effective the policy will be implemented.
Talking about the issue of cost, Harry and Changhua, these days people are aware of some of the front page stories about how and why authorities in our neighboring provinces and the municipalities try very hard to protect the air quality of the capital city, Beijing, like in Hebei. Yeah. We were told that some of the small to medium-sized enterprises would have to be shut to mitigate the impact of you know, industrial sources of pollution, to guarantee the air quality in Beijing because of the increase of smog in recent years. In our living memory, we feel pretty bad. So do you think ruling by decree, I mean closure of these small and medium-sized enterprises would help? What would be the consequences for the local GDP growth? When we talk about the growth of a green GDP, it means we have to do feasibility studies. We have to look after the basic livelihoods of the local folks. Without working for the SMEs, they would lose their salary. They would lose their basic bread and butter. That would be brutal. I don't think that's the purpose that the local government want to serve in shutting those small factories, the alleged sources of industrial pollution. So, Harry, what would be your solutions?
No, I see your dilemma there, and absolutely, you know, on the one hand, and Beijing, with a population of 20 million, you need a clean city, not polluted, because Beijing was notorious for its pollution for decades. Now it's starting to clean up. Certainly going to impact the environmental, neighboring the cities, I mean, municipalities' environmental standards. They have to raise up on that, so they go to continue to protect the clean air in Beijing. But on the other hand, I think that the government has to take this as a whole. It's not just each municipality's responsibility. You know, we really should treat China, this Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei region as a one, you know, big delta that really we need to really work them together. So one of the things I think we need to solution you are asking, I think, you know, we could do is that in the Hebei and Beijing area, thousands of years of historical sites, and tourism could be really one of the booming industry. You know, in any in the world, the tourism accounts 10% of the GDP in any given country if they do well. And now you know, the world is GDP is 10% is tourism, but China got a very small share of that. Beijing still has the number of.
We're talking about Hebei. Hebei is not known for tourism. Changhua, what do you think?
No, I think there's a lot of neighboring historic sites people can do, not only for the international tours, but also for domestic.
Yeah, let me take another step, actually. And if we all know, actually, a policy or regulation, if it's effective, it always has clearly defined liabilities and incentives, right? So any laws regulations is not universally applied to whatever, right? And I think this is where the story comes in. Hebei province decided to adopt a positive listing sort of policy, meaning you really need to take the actions. Of course, laws, regulations require you to take government to take actions, but it's very important that when it comes down to reality, companies, enterprises, large or small, they all are held accountable, liable, right? And depending on their performance, this is how the incentives or disincentives come in. So if a company, doesn't matter the size of the company, doesn't matter which industries, somehow it has really committed to adopt the green technologies and been performing to the level of the regulations or requirement standards, that needs to be guaranteed and incentivized, right? I think this is a differentiating part that comes in the Hebei context there, rather than universities say, okay, come on, air pollution in Beijing somehow today is really bad. All the facilities need to shut down. That's not even fair. And if even from legal perspective, whether that's really legal, that's another question to be discussed as well. Secondly, these days, actually, with the digital technology, information technology deployed so broadly in China today, the government and the society has a much, much powerful tool. We know exactly the emissions. We have online monitoring. We have different sources of emissions monitoring system. So the information technology, big data, pretty much is also providing another powerful tool to the government, actually, in terms of differentiating which company is complying with the laws, regulations, standards or not. If not, they need to be held accountable. And the liabilities of the newly revised laws, regulations in the last couple of years in the environmental context side really are much, much higher, heavier than before. Like we often say, so now Chinese laws, environmental regulations have teeth in it. What do we mean? We mean liabilities, right? And the serious liabilities, financial liabilities, and even administrative, even criminal liabilities there. So we have all those enabling factors already on the table. So coming down to Hebei province, that's absolutely the right direction to go. The positive listing is the right policy to go, and they need to be enforced very powerfully.
To be politically correct doesn't mean you take the right side of history when it comes to the environmental protection. A lot of measures would have to be rolled out to take care of the basic well-being of the ordinary folks, the rank and file, the most disadvantaged social groups, particularly those in Hebei province. Unfortunately, good news is that the local government is aware of the consequences and they are improving the administration. Thank you for being with us. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.